Today, I'm so happy to welcome my special guest, David Ferrugio. David is the host of Dead Talks podcast, where he engages death a little bit differently, as it says on the website. Having lost his father on 9/11 when he was 12, he learned the importance of discussion and sharing other people's stories. Grief, loss, death can all start with a dialogue, and his mission is to help people that have lost, that are grieving, and those that haven't faced death yet through the words of his guests, which are impressive, including Tony Hawk, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Billy Carson, David Dasmalchian, Brian Callen, hospice nurse Julie, among many others. And you can learn more at the website deadtalks.net or subscribe to the podcast wherever you may listen. So, David, welcome and thanks so much for joining me.
The pleasure's on this side. Thank you for giving me this opportunity, Karen. I appreciate it. I'm really excited.
I always enjoy talking to fellow podcasters because at least I know you're not too nervous. You get the whole scene, and so we can just sit and chat together and enjoy that. So I'm really grateful that you're here to talk with me. But I'd love to start with having you just share your story with us, and all the way back when you were 12, and your father's death, and kind of tell us how you ended up doing a podcast.
Sure, yeah, and feel free to interrupt me at any point if I start ranting. That tends to happen. But yeah, so as you alluded to in the introduction, I was 12 years old at the time on September 11th, and my dad was working at the World Trade Center. He was on the 105th floor of Tower One at Cantor Fitzgerald, which I later learned was, I believe, lost the most people, that company. And it was just still is a strange day. On a recent episode, I was talking to someone about how it's not a fading memory because you don't forget it, but it's been 20 plus years. So memories do seem to get a little foggy as time goes on. At this point of where I'm at in my life as a 35-year-old man compared to a 12-year-old boy, it still feels like a dream. And I don't want to say nightmare because that's the easy option, but it just feels like this really happened. And at the time, I was in school. I found out that something happened because my buddy Jeff nudged me at the beginning of first period. He was notoriously late and he happened to catch a glimpse at the news channel and saw what happened. And he approached me saying, "David, doesn't your dad work at the World Trade Center?" I'm like, "Yes." He goes, "A plane flew into the building." And even to this day, again, the oddity of just hearing those words, I was like, what do you mean? What does that mean? What do you mean a plane flew into the building? I wasn't even able to decipher what that meant. Obviously, it didn't sound good, but it just was so random and didn't make sense at that time. I tried going to the office to make calls. They wouldn't let me make a call back home because my big commuter town. So a lot of people were in New York. A lot was happening. They didn't know what to do. And, to try to make a long story, hopefully not as long, my mom decided to keep me in school the rest of the day. And I backed that decision as a man today. So much going on. She didn't know what was going on, trying to figure it all out, didn't want to pull me into the chaos, the inevitable chaos that was there already. And so I was going through the whole school day trying to figure out what was happening. Kids were getting called out of school. I was getting made fun of for being nervous, but that's middle school for you. And finally, the time came to go home. And this is a very small blessing. And I feel like with my whole experience, grief is made up of all these little blessings that turn out to be massive blessings. And it takes time to realize that. So some people might not want to hear that. You know what I mean? I don't just when someone's in the middle of grief, like, well, there's a lesson in here. I was like, no, if anything, I like to shut up more because sometimes words make things worse. But throughout time and contemplation, I realized having my best friend by my side walk home was a blessing because he normally wouldn't. But because he was a pain in the ass as a kid and a troublemaker, he got suspended from the school bus the year before, retroactively getting him in trouble for the new school year in seventh grade. So his mom asked him to walk home with me. So he can be home at my place and then she'll pick him up later just for his safety. So what I mean by the blessing was I wouldn't want anyone else by my side that day. And it wasn't as if we were old enough to contemplate it or support me. I had to go back to him to ask, "Do you remember anything about that walk?" And he just remembers it being very quiet. But we both share the same memory of that really sticks in both of our heads that I learned recently stuck in his. The last bend. Once we had to take this short walk home, we come around this bend where my house comes into view. And at that moment, that was the first time I could see my house, and there were cars stuff in the whole cul-de-sac. So people were at my house, and that's a moment I knew, oh shit. Okay, I don't
Mm.
know what it means, but something's going down. Why cars filled up in my house? And we got separated once I went through the door. And all I remember was walking through the kitchen into the living room where I saw my cousins, and it was as if their face knew my life was about to change forever. Now looking back at it, because clearly everyone's lives changed that day, but the look defining it now is like, oh shit, David's life is this boy is about to just be, everything's going to change. And then I looked at the TV for the first time. I don't remember who was trying to keep me from it, but they were trying to protect me and prevent me from seeing the footage. And at this point, it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, so it was all done. And that's one of those things going, time traveling back and going forward to where we are now, thinking it's so weird that I was going through that day and it was all happening and it all happened by the time I found out the truth. And
Wow.
once I saw the footage for the first time, I remember just breaking down and crying a lot, like a deep cry. And then it's as if it all went black and it was the next chapter of my life. I feel like my body just shut down. It was a biological response, a protective mechanism, which makes sense, system overload. And there's just so much I don't remember, which is frustrating growing up. But I understand why maybe mechanically, if you will, our bodies would do that. But it was as if, okay, you it's too much for you to handle right now at 12 years old. Want to stuff it down for a little bit, black you out until you have to figure it out later as a man. And that's been my whole journey leading up to this podcast.
Wow. That's one of the things that I've read about when children and adolescents experience grief. It's one experience at the moment that it happens, but you continually relive it as you develop and learn and grow. I mean, I think that's true for all of us at any age, but maybe especially when you are younger and your brain is still developing and you're so many things are coming online and you're carrying this weight of grief with you through all those experiences.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I'm going to paraphrase, hopefully not butcher it, but you know, uh, Mr. Grief himself, as I like to call it, David Kessler, who's a popular name in the field in regards to a grief expert, if you will. I had him on my podcast, and I brought this story up, talking about like the memory of it and the forgetfulness, and he kind of related to denial in a sense. Not that I was denying anything, but he's like, denial gets a bad rap because denial sometimes can be a good thing in a sense of maybe it's a different form of denial, and maybe I'm butchering the way he was explaining it, but it can give us a little bit of grace period because it might be too much to handle in the moment, and it almost gives you a little bit of a buffer to process it later on, maybe when you're more equipped or more ready for it. So I think in that aspect, being a child, as to what you said, and this is common and happens to people at all ages, I think, but maybe that was necessary, and it's just something built in our system that had to happen for me to process it later. And whatever processing means, I think I realized down the road I was doing things that we can talk about if you want, that I think helped me process it, and I didn't realize I was doing it. And I can tap into that if you want. I want to rob your whole show here.
No, sure. I'd love to hear about that.
And there's a couple things I did. One, my dad used to have a punching bag, and that was my physical release. Which now, fast forward again, I started hearing studies that the physical aggressional aspect that a lot of men do, maybe in particular, doesn't necessarily do anything according to some studies. It feels like it does, but in regards to long term, apparently it doesn't. But I was beating the crap out of this punching bag, listening to Linkin Park in 2001, Hybrid Theory specific album, which I feel like saved my life. I would just blast it. I think when no one was, when I had a couple little moments by myself at home, and literally beat this punching bag till my knuckles bled, and I would just let it out. I don't recall being angry. Maybe in those moments I was, and maybe I didn't feel like an angry child moving forward because maybe I was doing that. I think that was a small relief that I just let out on a punching bag as opposed to a wall or a person that maybe would have been, maybe seemed, now looking back, healthier options that I just innately did. And attached to that, I would constantly watch the footage over and over again. At least as I got older, again, I don't remember how much I did as a child, but I'm pretty sure I did too. Obviously, internet is way more accessible as years went on. But I would constantly watch the footage over and over again, almost like a psychopath. And even at the time when I would do it later in my life, I'm like, is this good? Am I going down a weird path where I shouldn't be just reliving this? And then I learned down the line, like, there's a thing called exposure therapy, which put a title on what I feel like I was doing. I was exposing myself to the heart of the trauma. I was exposing myself to watch where my dad died. 'Cause I had the weird privilege, even though it's violent as hell to see the footage. I couldn't see my dad, but it was as grotesque as it can get without actually seeing him die. But I had the footage right in front of me. I would look for more angles, try to put myself in New York City, wishing I was there, even though what the heck, I don't know what I can do, but I just put myself there. It would allow me to cry when I couldn't cry. It would force me to cry, but I'd be facing it. And there was such a lesson there of facing it. And it's scary to face anything in life. It doesn't have to mean grief or anything. Just facing whatever the reality is, if whatever you want to call reality, that's a whole nother conversation of this world that we live in. And I think putting myself there, also toying with the idea that maybe, I can't do this forever. So maybe it's not healthy, turned out to be healthy for me. And whether it's 9/11 or whatever it is, I think really the what I'm trying to get at is facing it and almost putting yourself there in a form of exposure therapy, however you see fit. But I think me doing that down the line just made me more comfortable with it. It later turned me into someone who's comfortable talking about my experience and hearing other people's stories and not letting it weigh me down, because I do hear a lot of, heavy stories, but to me this is life. And I'm not trying to say that in a desensitized way, because it hurts like hell. It sucks. That's real. There's no timeline. You can take as however long as you want, but at some point, I think there is a level of accountability to ourselves. I just hope, I personally, this is coming from David, whoever's listening, take everything with a grain of salt. But for me, it comes to a certain point, a level of accountability about how I respond to certain situations. And, I take as much time as I need. It might take me 10 years, 20 years, or however long it took. But at some point, I'm like, okay, this didn't happen to me. It happened, but this wasn't like yeah, it's literally an attack. It's 9/11 attack. So it's a terrible joke reference there, but I just don't take it from the victim mindset in my head that this happened to me. Why? Even though I've had those questions, I think that was part of the process too. I'm not saying don't ask those questions, but there is a level of how do I respond to this? What can I do moving forward? And to me, living the best I can, still giving myself permission to find joy, still giving my permission to feel everything and continue moving forward with this life, is doing a service to my father and living life for him. And to me, it's a disservice not to work to get there. And I personally believe, I just have a strong faith in human beings, even as messed up as this world can be, of the power that everyone holds. I don't care who's listening right now, you, me, someone in the Philippines right now. I just believe in the human spirit, even when it seems improbable, that we can persevere through anything. And it's not necessarily forgetting it. It's not going to go away, but it's persevering through it by living and grieving.
Mm. Well, I really resonate with what you're saying there. And just like briefly, my experience was when I was your age. My father died by suicide, which was a really traumatic loss to experience. And I spent my days every day waking up thinking, maybe tomorrow I'll wake up and I will feel like I did before he died. All I wanted was to go backwards in time and feel the same way inside. And finally, it took a while, but I finally woke up one day and realized that that's never going to happen. I'm not going backwards. And I understood. I was just trying to wipe away the grief. I was just trying to cut it off and not face it. And as soon as I turned around then and said, all right, I have to go into this pain. I can't make it disappear. That's when I started feeling it all, but I actually started making progress and learning things and really moving through it instead of just being stuck in that place. So I agree with you completely. Facing it is a necessary step.
Yeah, and I can't tell you, like, I have no answers. I feel like everything I say is just from things I've learned through other people and from my own experience. I try to do my best to never say there's a way to do it. But also, I also hear people say, also, thank you for sharing that, by the way. I have some questions for you at some point, by the way. But it's people often say, there's no wrong way to grieve. I agree with that partially. I think it's kind of like a double-edged spectrum. I do think there's a wrong way to grieve in regards to you're just doing unhealthy things. We can't just negate the fact that we all go down a path of alcohol or just serial date, whatever it may be. I don't want to give examples, but I think there are certain things that it's not the right way to grieve, in my opinion. But also, it is the right way to grieve, because sometimes you got to go through the shit like that. You got to do those
Mhm.
things that we know are bad for us, because that's part of the process too, and that's okay. I'm not advocating anyone to go that way, but I'm also saying if you do that, give yourself grace, because that's part of it too. So it is the wrong way, but it is the right way, if that makes any sense. You know what I mean? Like, I think we give ourselves a hard time. Sometimes our worst enemy is ourself, and often that's my case. I'm my own worst enemy through the way I see how I'm doing things, and sometimes I'm just like, I just look up. I'm just like, I don't know. I have no idea. It's a question to myself. Am I doing what I know deep down is right, or am I ignoring that? Because we all have this inner voice, which I believe in. I think we know the answer. I think we know what's right for us. And there are times when we know we're not doing the right thing and we still ignore that voice and we choose the other path. And like that's okay. But at some point, we got to get up. Sometimes we got to make that decision, and the decision always comes down to us. It doesn't to me. It's you can have these wise words from people that had experience, my friends, my family, and they will impact me. But at the end of the day, it could just be noise because if I'm not making the conscious decision to do something that I know I need, then you're gonna get stuck, and it's moving with the grief. It's never gonna leave you, and it's just a new normal.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And it fascinates me that on the one hand, grief is universal. I mean literally everyone will grieve unless you die before everyone else you know and love dies. Literally we will all experience grief. And yet it's a unique experience. So no matter how much I talk about what it was like for me, that may not reflect anyone else's experience with it. And it's kind of fascinating. That's an inner journey that's unique to each of us, except everyone is going through it, which is why we need to keep talking about it so that everyone feels supported, even while they feel alone in their own process.
Yeah, I want to say you're very good at not asking a question, but leading the conversation at the same time. That's a gift you have. That's wonderful. Uh, you're very good at that. I don't even know where I got distracted by how well you're doing it. That I was like, I don't know what the hell I was going to say
Oh,
next. Just want to throw that compliment your way.
here's a question. What do you think about what I just said? There's a question.
No, but I love the art of that for people. Like again, we're both in the podcast world, and it's just there is an art to what you're doing. And I'm just sorry. I'm just maybe I'm fanboying over here. I don't know what it is, but the thing with when it comes to grief, it can bring out the worst of you, and I want to say it will bring out the worst of you. It will bring out the worst of you, but I don't want people to forget the profound capability that grief has to bring out the best of you. And you might not see it right now if you're in it, if you're in the middle of it, or maybe you're through it. I don't know where anyone is in their current grief experience, if you will, or even just going through life. I acknowledge that it will bring the worst of you, as long as you can acknowledge that, but just don't forget the amazing, profound capabilities that we also have to bring out the best of you, and hang on to that. Even if you don't see it, even if you don't know how you're going to get there, just know that it can and it will. And again, depending on where you are, it's going to be really hard to see. But I think that's the importance of hearing someone like you speak and the people I've had on my podcast, because I like to focus on the bullshit that happens and the trauma of the story. But even though grief is non-linear, the stories that I try to have is linear in a sense of, okay, where did you come from that? Like how, and in stories of perseverance, it's stories of pain and all these emotions. But at some point I've heard so many amazing stories of people not getting out of it. Cause like I said, you don't get out of it, but you do learn to live with it. And there is still so much beauty and so many things of making your life better, even though I would trade everything that I have now that I've learned from and I feel become a stronger and better person for my dad. I wouldn't
Mhm.
be like, oh, I want these lessons more than my father in my life, but that's not what it is. That's just not what it is. My dad's not here. And if I'm sounding like a hard ass, I'm going to be a little bit of a hard ass. That's what it is. And I just don't want people to forget that even though hope can seem like a dangerous word, don't lose it at the same time.
Yeah, it's this paradox. Like we're walking these journeys with sometimes conflicting emotions and needs. But like you say, you can be grateful for so many things that have happened and for your life itself, and not grateful for the fact that your father's gone, that you don't have him here right now, but grateful for everything else. I do think some people get that confused when you say I'm feeling gratitude on my journey.
Yeah, I think gratitude sometimes can be there could be like toxic positivity. I think that's the worst. But if it feels real to you, as long I think there's a fake it till you make it sometimes, a practice and a discipline to just try that path, and eventually it keeps up. It keeps up. But at the same time, gratitude is It's a real thing, people. You know what I mean? It used to be, I feel like gratitude was a woo-woo thing. Might seem like a woo-woo thing, but there's a lot to be thankful for. I can't speak for everyone else because the reality of life is a lot of people, some people in a baseball reference start on third base with home feet 90 feet away. Some people start on first base. There are advantages and disadvantages to people. There's, there's not equal opportunity for everyone. And I can't relate to a lot to most things that other people go through. I'm aware of that, but I still want to believe in the idea that we can find the positive in everything. People get pissed at me when when some people think that way. I got in a conversation with someone about I wasn't focused on anything a specific example, but it was actually the story of the Chinese farmer. Have you ever heard of the Chinese farmer?
Yeah, yeah,
And so the whole premise, without going through the whole parable for anyone listening, is just it's we'll see. And when it's kind of like when one thing's bad, tomorrow could be good, and when one thing's good, tomorrow could be bad. It's kind of like we'll see. And I was just expressing the modality of just having of relating to that. And sometimes people take it the wrong way of trying to find the positive in horrible situations, because there are horrible things happening right now where to find the positive in that almost seems near impossible. But I still don't see anything wrong with trying to find a positive, because at the end of the day, it's just a positive. Even if it's a momentary bliss of positivity amongst 99% hellish things, I'm not going to condemn the practice of trying to find a positive. I just personally don't see anything wrong with that. I mean, there's a time and a place to say it. Keep it with yourself if you have to, because I understand there's certain situations that are actively happening now that it's like there's no positive to this, but I still choose to try to find that. I will always choose that path. I could hang me on the cross if you want. Whatever you want to say. That's just how I see it.
I really have to agree with that. And even in the days when I wasn't able to see anything positive in what was happening, it was later on in retrospect, I looked back and then it became clearer to me that there was always something there. There was always something going on, some thread of something of love or a thread of joy or concern from someone else. Something else was there that at the moment I couldn't recognize. And so I get why someone in the midst of really acute
Yes,
grief might say, don't tell me to find the positive. There's nothing
absolutely.
positive here. I get that. But for me, I guess it's all been, I mean, now I'm so many years out from my deep grief experience. I have had so much time to reflect on it and look back on it that I just see the richness of all of it. And it's like this tapestry that's been woven together of different colors and different threads and much pain, much hurt and suffering, but also joy and love and learning about life and understanding suffering and even doing a better job of how I navigate the day to day of
Abs-
life.
Absolutely. I think you said a key thing in regards to, yeah, is if someone's in the middle of something right now, I think that could be toxic positivity to force it. In certain, like for me personally, I try to, even in dark moments, and usually that comes in the form of humor. But I realize that, I can't crack a joke with certain people. I have to read the room. But around my people, jokes will happen in the deep pits of hell. That is just how, like, humor can be seen as a a deference, or if you will, if that's even the right word, or a defense mechanism. Maybe it was at some point, but for me, I see this world as a dark comedy, and I try not to take it too seriously, but also blend the moments of taking it seriously, because those moments come too, mostly on the behalf of others that I care about. But at the same time, the lessons will come, and I just want people to keep an open heart for that. It doesn't happen to happen now. It doesn't happen to happen in the first year, but I just want people to save a little space in their heart for the possibility that you know there will be a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah. I remember one of the images that came to me. I think I read it somewhere in some kind of Eastern spirituality, this idea that a block of wood has to be carved and hollowed out to become a violin. And that so there's all this pain in life of what's carving us and shaping us and hollowing us out. But we can make beautiful music once that happens. And the more we allow that, then the possibility for more and more beautiful music is there. And so somehow that comforted me. Somehow all along the way, I would think, okay, a little more carving, little more hollowing out here. And
I love that. It's beautiful. And I think, sometimes it's life carving us, but then we have to do the carving ourselves. I think it's a blend of both because life's going to carve us regardless, but it's us up to us to kind of guide that brush, if you will, sometimes to carve it in the way we want.
Yeah. Well, so tell me, when did you start your podcast and what inspired you to start it?
I started in 2020. I believe launched my first episode right before the pandemic. So I had, had these plans just to keep it, to have this consistency. And then the pandemic kind of slowed my roll a little bit, not to use it as an excuse, but I had to persevere through that. And I just kept it going. So it's crazy to think it's been 5 years, but in 2022, I think I took a different level of commitment, realizing, oh, this is what I want to do, and there's so much more that's going to come from just the podcast. That's the main vein, but I have other plans of curating this brand, if you will, around the premise of normalizing the conversation of death to me, which is a conversation about life and sharing stories and hopefully impacting other people the best way that I can through my guests, and if I have anything good to say. But it is inspired, of course, by the initial death of my dad, which happened many years earlier. I've been witness to death before that. I've lost friends and family since then, and I was always someone, according to my mother, who wasn't very vocal. I internalized a lot, and I still believe I do. But I, along the way, came more comfortable of expression, at least through my experience with grief and losing my father, and in many other ways. And knowing that I was someone who internalized and didn't share, progressing to someone who realized that sharing felt good and seemed helpful, and hearing from other people, I just wanted to blend that into the podcast, realizing I don't know if people do that enough, and I wanted to do that through sharing of other stories, because honestly, I had a little feeling of guilt that my dad died on September 11th in a public way, where for the rest of my life I'm going to get text messages every anniversary because everyone and their mother knows about September 11th. And then I had this counteractive thought: what about people that someone that died on November 6th, 2007? No one's remembering that date besides, people that are personally affected. So they're not getting those text messages every November for the rest of their life. People are going to forget naturally. But my dad died on a public scale, so I get that attention, and it was a weird guilt towards it that I've released. I know it's not real guilt. I just had this thought, and so that parlayed into the whole premise of what I already mentioned, but also to share other people's stories, to give them that acknowledgement, and to let other people know they're not alone. And so it's kind of spurred with all those reasons. There's a million other things, me just being fascinated and curious in general. I love stories. I love exploring different ideologies. The reason I love traveling is because I see all different faces. I hear new stories. I see different parts of the world, and that enhances my life to seeing how big this world, and it helps me get through it. And so I hope by the voices of not just mine, but mostly other stories, hopefully I do a good job as a host getting it out. It resonates with people because a lot of people feel alone through grief. A lot of people feel alone in this world. And I feel like even if you don't have people around you, at least we have this amazing technology to connect with other people. And though every story that I share may not resonate with you personally, I do believe every story has something you could pull from it, even if it relates to nothing you went through. And I want people to have the option to hear different stories, even if you don't agree. I think it's very important to listen to different perspectives and stories that don't relate to you. If anything, I think that's more important. That's how we learn, through new information, not just getting swallowed by everything that agrees with us. So I try to have these eclectic conversations, different religious perspectives, things that go against the grain on purpose, and just share grief stories because every grief story is different. So I just have a real passion for seeking, and sometimes seeking, with the understanding that I might not get answers, but it's gonna carve that wood, as you mentioned, the more I do it, and I hope it helps others.
Mm. I love that. And I've had a similar experience with podcasting of discovering that, I mean, most of the interviews I do for myself because I'm so curious. I want to find out what people do and how they think and what motivated them and why they're doing what they do. And it's been such a rich learning experience for me. And then I only hope that, as you do as well, that other people benefit by listening to that. But I also think if someone's afraid of talking about death, to sit and listen to the two of us easily talking about death and grief and being comfortable with it, maybe that helps them see it's okay. It's okay to go there.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's still wild to me. I give people, again, I try to give people grace, but sometimes I look in with a side eye. I'm like, in my head, we're gonna die, right? We're all the one-way ticket. I mean, then again, there's a whole spiritual question. Maybe we're coming back, of course, but in regards to what we know in this body, like I'm most likely not gonna be David again, and you're not gonna be you again. We're all going that way. So I'm just giving him a little wink. Hey, it's okay to mention it. It's because I really believe that the more you push it off, when your time comes to either grieve, and I said when your time comes to grieve, and maybe if you ever, depending on how you're gonna die, it's it's inevitable. I just butchered that word, but it's inevitable. It's going to happen. So I think the more you face it, back to that original point of facing my grief and facing life as much as possible, it helps. But we don't want to face it because we know it's scary and we know it's going to be painful. But if you're going to face the pain at some point and something as inevitable as this, let's face it now. And I'm not saying you got to listen to dead talks or your podcast every day, but at the same time, have those conversations with your people. It's okay if you have parents that are getting older and you're automatically having these thoughts of mortality. You can have those conversations. And I think certain people are just stubborn in many ways. They're not going to have it. Some cultures are superstitious, which I've learned, and I don't know how to get around that one, to be honest. But it's just it's the one common bond that we have, and it's so ironic in a world that's so divisive. Many people are pushing away the dialogue of one theme that is the one thing we all share that can bring us together, as weird as that sounds, because it affects us on the daily. What do you go on a computer screen? It's all over the place, and it's horrifying the way it's seen there. But by having a conversation, confronting it, to me, makes it's life. It all comes back to death. That's why I say my conversations and these conversations with you are a conversation about life. It's not a conversation about death. I think it's two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, that's so true. And I can say through my experience in hospice that the people who come to hospice who have thought about death, who have gotten educated and learned a few things before they arrive there, have a much easier time accepting the end of life. And it ends up being a more positive experience because they're not coming there terrified and just dealing with the fact that they're mortal for the first time ever. They've already thought about it and they're already prepared.
Yeah, and for me personally, just because I talk about this all the time, I'm not immune to death. It still freaks me out. Sometimes, like I feel it. I'm like, oh shit, yeah. What the hell is gonna happen? It is a little crazy. But then I'm like, you know what? Like my buddy on one podcast, I had him on the earlier episodes. He looked at me, he said something I never forget. It's so funny to me and so true. He's like, you know what? You know what? He's like, the only way I look at it, he's like, your dad did it, my brother did it, our grandparents did it. He's like, I can fucking do it. It's like some Michael Jordan inspirational quote. It's like, I can do it. Everyone else has done it. So I mean, regardless of what happens, we have no choice. And it comes to just accepting the fate and what we have now. It all brings me back to the present. This is what I have. It's fun to philosophize about the afterlife. I have my beliefs, of course. But in regards to this idea that the people are here, people are gone. It's so bizarre. And that bizarrety to me is so fascinating. You know what I mean? We're all in this, we were put here for whatever reason, if there is a reason. I think there's a reason, but regardless if there is, this is magic. Everything about this life is magic. Like we're talking, like we're across the country right now. I'm able to have a conversation with you through the air and the invisible. And that's if we're going to talk about the afterlife. I'm going on one of my rants, so I hope you're still listening. But it's like we're talking about the afterlife, and like, which is part of the idea of death. It's like we are constantly communicating through an invisible world, radio waves, frequencies. That is how the world operates. But we don't have a second thought about that, right? It's like we could Google it. This is how radio frequencies work, but I still don't understand it. But we just assume it as a routine daily effect of life. We are constantly communicating through an invisible world, right? And then people think that the afterlife is just no way. That's impossible. What do you mean? Our whole world works through an invisible world. So why is it impossible? And I'm not saying believe it. I'm not forcing it down your throat. If you're happy, hey, believe that. It's all good. It doesn't affect me. I hope we find peace. But the fact that people say it's impossible, I'm like, pick up a phone and FaceTime the person you love. How are you guys communicating? You know what I mean? So it's like I just believe in so many possibilities in this world. And to me, it's exciting. I get a little weird and woo-woo about it, but it's like it's such a magic world around us. And I can't help but see it that way, as crazy and scary as it is.
I feel that way too. And I mean, we're made of energy and energy can't be created or destroyed. When the physical body dies, the energy goes somewhere.
Somewhere.
Energy stays. So
So what do you
that's
believe exactly?
something. So what do I believe?
Yeah.
Well, I definitely believe there's some sort of an afterlife, and especially after being with a lot of hospice patients and seeing them at the end of life. Excuse me. and seeing the experiences that they have, and even how some of them talk about the beauty that they're witnessing and seeing kind of as they're getting closer to the other side. And then dreams I've had of patients after they died, and even my own father, seeing him in my dreams. All of those things show me there's just something more. There just has to be. It would be completely random and wasted if there weren't something else other than just this physical life.
Yeah, that's how I feel. I feel like there just has to be, but all the time, then my rational brain and my openness, I'm like, I guess technically there doesn't have to be. There could just be nothing. But I, again, based on these anecdotes and experiences that I've had, experience that you've had, experience that I've heard, if I was a betting man, which I only am when I'm in Jersey because it's legal here, it's like I'm putting all my chips on the fact that something's happening. You know what I mean? To me, it sounds way crazier that there's nothing. That just sounds way crazy. This is all, again, too much magic, too many experiences. Yeah, there's people that are bullshitting out there, just making things up to sell a book, sure. But there's too many out there. There's too many stories of people that I trust. There's too many amazing things that happen every day. And again, to me, it literally sounds more wild to think that this is all for naught. I'm like, to me, I say no way, but I'm also aware that I don't know for sure.
And I was curious to know if there's anyone that you've interviewed or any story you've heard that maybe changed your perspective or opened your mind in a certain way. Anything you could share? That's I didn't prepare you for this in advance, so
No,
it's
hey, you didn't prepare me for anything, but I chose
it's
this way.
true.
It's all good. No, this is I prefer it this way. It's all on the fly, and that's the thing with podcasts. People get so irritated sometimes to realize when certain things are said, or not just my podcast or across podcasts. A lot of podcasts I listen to are just improvise this to that, and I think people forget that like it's just a conversation. And obviously, some people may edit things. I don't personally edit anything out unless the guest asks me. And it's like this is if you think about people, your listeners. I'm like, if you're in your living room, you sometimes say something in the wrong way. You maybe don't mean it that way. And it's just all we're rolling live, people. That's all I'm trying
Yeah.
to say. Um, but in regards to my guests, there's been so many. But I want to say the near death experiences in general definitely shaped or opened my mind to what's out there. And then from there, I look at it maybe a little too logically, but what are the patterns? Is this person, are they all saying a lot of the same things? Because to me, those patterns offer a little more evidence, in my opinion. And I've seen a lot of patterns, and just the stories in general are just so wild about how people have crossed over, if you will, through these near death experiences, regardless of what you believe. And seeing those consistencies, it expanded from me being raised Catholic, which I never personally identified with. I kind of just went through the motions of heaven and hell, and that's like the only world I knew. But then when I started hearing about words like spirit guides and life review and choosing this life, I didn't just be like, oh, this is definitely right because she's telling me. I was like, that's interesting. I never even thought of that as a theory, let alone someone had this experience. And then I keep hearing it over and over again from hundreds and thousands, not hundreds of thousands, but thousands of testimonies. And it opened my eyes like this resonates with me. It really resonates with me. And it evolved into this belief that I can't paint you a picture of what I think it looks like or feels like. But from what I've heard, it just seems like yeah, energy, like you said, Einstein, energy cannot be created or destroyed. We transmute. We're still energy now. We're going to be energy again, maybe in a different form. I don't know if you want to call it consciousness, but I think there's still an awareness there of some sort that we can't comprehend in these meat suits. But there is an awareness that is just detached from all human ego and understanding. I just believe that it's hard for people to grasp because it's just, we don't have maybe some people have a higher sense of tapping into that, but I just don't think we can comprehend the feeling. And I believe it's just a spiritual evolution. I think we are continually evolving. And the way I like to see it is I feel, and this is all theory, my David Ferrugio theory, but it's like we look at our world. I think every human, for the most part, not most of us that in our circle, perhaps, or if you're listening, are trying to evolve and transcend. We're trying to be a better person for the most part. We're trying to get better and improve, and we're trying to transcend. We're trying to advance in this microscopic world, who you are, right? So every day I'm trying to get better. I'm trying to ascend to a better person. I think that is just a microscopic speck of the spirit world where, say, souls exist. We have our soul. That is what we're doing. We're constantly ascending, but on just a massive picture that we can't even comprehend. This is one life of ascension. Extrapolate that to a soul, and we're trying to get closer and closer to source and getting closer and closer to God or whatever you want, whatever you want to call it, the creator. I don't know. I just think it's a constant evolution of improvement. And I think whenever we get to the other side, I think the work continues, but work doesn't feel like work in this suffering aspect that I think life is.
Mm.
Does it make any sense?
Totally. And I really resonate with it. And you're inspiring me because I have a lot of these thoughts and ideas too about the afterlife. I don't talk about it very much on my podcast, but I realize it's because I'm afraid that they're coming from a medical background, that there are people who listen who would reject that idea. But I really admire that you're just bold and you talk about whatever you want to talk about. And some people may not like it and some people may embrace it. So you're kind of making me feel more courageous here that I need to step it up a little bit and have a bigger variety of guests. And
I mean, whatever feels right to you. I mean, you're on your own journey, and I think words can piss some people off, and it is what it is. I just know my intention not to. I like to preface it. This is just from me. Like, you don't have to believe anything I'm saying, and I don't have to believe anything else any other people are saying. I just try to keep an open mind that my mind can change, and I'm a little malleable. I have my foundational aspects of life that I feel like I'm never going to change, and my values and certain things. But in regards to things that I personally am not sure, it's just I'm open to learn. I just want to learn. I mean, there's a whole big world out there. There's a whole big world out there. And if you don't expose yourself to it, then you don't know of it. And then you're just going to stay where you are. But if you're happy where you are, again, that's cool. Be happy. Be happy. I want everyone to be happy as much as possible. And I can't do that. Like, there's Jiminy the Cricket and Pinocchio. Ever see that scene? The old school Pinocchio movie, Jiminy the Cricket. My mom always points it out. It's hilarious. He's laughing hysterically, the little scene, the cartoon, Jimmy and the Cricket. He's on a shelf. He's like laughing and laughing, and he sees a statue with the mean face. He gets scared, and he just looks at the camera and goes, "Well, you can't please everybody." And that is one of my foundations. You can't please everybody, your family, friends. But there's something about authenticity. I'm not completely authentic. I try to be, but like I'm still self-conscious in many ways. But I think everyone is better off just being authentically them. And yeah, I find myself tiptoeing, but then sometimes I'm like, but what I'm trying to say is not to insult anyone or this or that. I'm just trying to share and learn. And some people might not like me. That's fine. I understand that everyone's not going to like me, but I mean, what am I going to do?
I really appreciate your philosophy that we're here, like life is really about just trying to grow and ascend, each one of us, learn something new, grow the best way we possibly can. Because I believe that, and actually getting comfortable with death has really helped me with that perspective because suddenly it's like, well, my life is limited. I only have a short time. I might as well focus on what I can learn from every experience instead of, as you mentioned, being in victimhood or, feeling sorry for myself forever. If I can turn it around and look for how could I grow from this? What could I learn? Then whether I see anything positive or not, I'm helping to create something positive out of what has happened.
For sure. And again, I always say this, I think I said it earlier. There are people in situations that get the shit end of the stick, and they're put in situations that they didn't choose. They put in situations that genuinely have an incredible disadvantage all over the world. So I'm not even trying to preach this inspirational words about my philosophy when I'm in a position where I'm blessed to have certain thing to be in a certain position. I've been through my shit. It's not just hasn't been a cakewalk, but at the same time, I have my family. I'm at my mom's right now, staying here. Like, some people have a place to go. So this isn't to me. I'm like, I don't. Even though I've had my challenges in life, I still put things in perspective that some people. It's much harder, much so. I can have a word in the dictionary to describe how much harder people have it to not feel like a victim. But then there's also amazing stories out there of these people I'm talking about not having that victim mentality and persevering through. But I can't be that person to express that because I'm not in that position. But in from what my experience is and how it relates to me, that's just where my head's at. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we both live in Los Angeles, which just has gone through and is still going through these horrific fires. So we're seeing people from all walks of life and the full spectrum of life going through terrible losses right now. And uh, it's interesting. I'm just thinking a lot about about communal grief and how we come together as a community to share in the loss and the grief when something huge like this happens, which was also true for 9/11, except so much greater loss of life in that tragedy.
Yeah, Again, it's a flip side of the coin because my place where I'm at in Culver is fine, and I'm okay. I know everyone in LA knows one or multiple people that lost their house. Obviously, there were people that died, and it's the rallying that I've seen around LA, and I've said this recently, and I think on social media somewhere, I was like, it's so incredible. And again, I don't want to nauseously focus on the positive, but I was saying, I was like, if there's one thing that I want everyone to realize right now, actively while these fires are going, look at the way LA is rallying. Look at the way the community comes together in these situations. In a place like LA, which is Hollywood, and everyone is cold and looking out for themselves because in many ways LA's bullshit like that. I'm not gonna lie, I've been there since 2011 if you're in that scene. But everyone is still rallying. The support has been unbelievable and it's a beautiful thing and that's what these big events do. Almost every time. Again, 9/11 relates, that's personal to me. The support that I had and have was that's why I don't give myself any credit many of the times. The support I had was just insane from the country, the world. I guess it comes from all different places, and we're seeing that right now. And in my opinion, as someone who's not detrimentally, devastatingly affected by these fires like the people in my life are, that is my opinion. That is my path and my belief of how we persevere through that, how they do that, which is support and community, which we're actively seeing. And it's going to be a long road. It is a overwhelming amount of grief for so many people right now. The city's never going to be the same. So in many ways, I'm affected in the residual effect of this because the city's not going to be the same. But for those that are going through it, lean into the support and have your moments alone and feel it like you were saying. Allow yourself to feel it. Give yourself grace. Give yourself time. And it's scary to think that a lot of these people, some people are really affected where they don't have places to go. And that's the even scarier part. But the community and the support that we're seeing that is the one magical part about what's happening. And I truly believe that is the momentum that I hope and we will see LA and the community continue to do to guide everyone that's truly affected through this because the support system is so important.
Yeah. Just this week, I was sweeping up the ashes on my patios that fell here, even though I'm about 20 miles away from the burn area, and thinking like, wow, these are mingled ashes from probably everything that burned that are falling right here. So sweeping up I'm sweeping up all this loss that happened for other people. And then it occurred to me that, everyone has the ash on their patios everywhere. So we're all being touched by it. And almost like there's something, maybe the very act of sweeping it up, depositing the ashes and removing it, like maybe in some way in my little piece of the world, I helped restore something. I did something out of love and helped restore something. And maybe as all of us are helping cleaning up in our own little way, we're part of that support process, holding space, the restoration process. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's where my head was.
No, yeah, I mean, you just put me in a weird place, not in a bad way, of just like this when you see the ashes, like the ashes are the remnants of all the loss, and that's everywhere. It's all over the city, and it's on our porches, and it's a metaphor for what loss is. We're covered in these ashes that represent loss, whether it's through what we feel and the emotions of it. But then there comes a time of sweeping it up and cleaning it up and working through it, and maybe that's what the sweeping represents. But it's just again, this is the time where I'm not even going to tell anyone that's going through it to just focus on the positive because like how do you see the positive in this? But if there was anything where you had to force it, it's the community, and I think it seems like a lot of people have that support through strangers, through people around them, and I just want to keep that momentum going. And I hope that we don't forget the people that we know that are affected as time passes, because as time passes, everyone's got their life, but this is such a communal aspect of grief, a city of grief right now. It's not even if you aren't directly affected and lost your home. I know friends and family that are affected because now it affected their job in some capacity. And then there's the lingering effects of the health of the city through the air. That's a whole nother discussion, which is wild. It's like a grief city for in many ways. Because I don't know what I'm in a weird place. If I'm being honest, I'm just freestyling right now. It put me in a weird place, and I'm not in a place of grief through what I know people are going through right now. But it shifted something because I have my family on the East Coast. And my plans are to come here and be close to them. I need to get my my podcast is doing great, which I'm grateful for, but it's not at the place yet where I can just jump ship, you know what I mean, and do it over there. And this just shifted me existentially. It's like I feel, I don't know why, but I feel like it's moving me out of LA, not in a way of just running away. It's just like a weird existential shift. So I feel affected existentially, and that's nowhere near what everyone's going through. So this has nothing to do with me. I'm just saying like there's residual effects to these public events that happen. It could be directly with the people that are really going through it, but then I have friends and family that have been stressed out because, especially in the beginning, where they have jobs that are take them outdoors, but now the air quality is affecting that, and they're nervous about that. So these public aspects of grief and these events has such an astounding residual effects for a community. And again, it comes back to support.
Well, thank you for talking about that with me because it is such a public event. It is shared by everyone everywhere. And I was reading that in a previous wildfire, they found debris and ash 5,000 miles away from the epicenter of the burn, you know? So really it's a much bigger perimeter than we even can imagine. And so for everyone who's not from LA that we're talking about this, it does affect all of you, everyone who's listening.
Yeah, and again, I don't know when this episode is airing or if hopefully you're still listening to the episode, but the air quality is definitely something, again, coming from a furthest from a scientist as possible. It's just, I was concerned from the beginning and I immediately related it to 9/11 in regards to the inhalation that affected New York for people years down the road. People got their health is destroyed. People died from the inhalation. And granted, that was more condensed, but nevertheless, this is even bigger. And people I talk to in my circle, I keep checking in on, obviously with people that lost their houses, but also, hey, you're just being a little precautious on, the air quality and stuff because people are, it seems like, again, from my small circle, looking at the AQI meter as we discussed, which gives you general air quality and it doesn't contest of the PVC pipes, which I've read, and maybe it's accurate, fact check on your own, that could last in the air for decades. There's the insulation, the toys, the carpeting, the chemicals, the metals. There's lead, asbestos. The AQI, from my understanding, again, doesn't tell the full story. And I'm just nervous that it's something that's going to happen down the road. So I'm just asking people to just be precautious. There's going to be inconveniences keeping your windows closed, having to mask up again, and all that stuff. But it's like, I don't think it's not a joke. It's not something just to take lightly, in my opinion. And I hope people just at least consider that. And if there's new information that I'm not covering that says otherwise, I would love to hear it. And I would want to be educated on this because I am no fight by far an authority to be speaking on this. This is just from my humanistic point of view, and the residual effect of these fires is profound.
You're so right. And I mean it is like a good, I guess, example of this ripple effect of grief in a sense, and how it does ripple out and touch everyone, and especially in such a massive tragedy as this or 9/11. But it's such a reminder of how we're all connected. We're all affected by something that happens in another area. And it's a time to just hold space for that and be mindful.
Yeah, and the public grief is such a wild experience. And I'm not comparing it to 9/11 or vice versa, but it has that butterfly effect because I see so many people in a very sad place right now who haven't really been affected or even know someone super directly affected, but it's just this, no pun intended, but it's like grief is in the air. It's grief is in the air with these
Yes,
fires. No pun
yes.
intended, but grief is in the air and that spreads around. Even if you're not directed, it affects everyone's mood. It's affecting everyone's mood. Everyone's sad. And I just, again, not to sound like a broken record, but if we try to find some kind of beauty through it, it's the activity that we're seeing throughout the city in regards to being there for each other. And I don't know what else to do. I don't know what else people can do. And again, I'm outside of LA right now, but I'm offering my services for real estate the best I can in regards to like not taking commission. This isn't a plug. Real estate is not even my main thing right now, but it's granted, I'm not there in front of the fires, and I know there's the first responder. There's so many people who are doing more than I can do, but hopefully conversations like this help. You don't have to be a firefighter to help people. You could be there as an emotional support, this or that, whatever it is. But it's amazing to see the way people are coming together. And damn, those first responders again, it's um, it's incredible. It's like the firefighters sometimes maybe seen sitting around a lot of the time, but when it comes to when they're needed, it is. I just pray for them And I pray for, because they're the ones that are going to, they're in the front lines. And I pray for their safety, not only now, but just again, the same thing with 9/11, the firefighters that had to breathe a lot of the stuff in, they got really banged up. And I'm praying for them. And I hope that, I don't want that to get brushed under the rug like it was with 9/11.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, in terms of this community grief we talked about, I think it brings us all the way back full circle to what you were talking about at the beginning, the things that you did um, in the midst of your grief, like, first of all, facing it. And so that's why we're talking about it, to help all of us face it, not be in denial, not shove it away, not pretend like it didn't happen, but to just face it and face the pain and the suffering of it and express all the emotions, anger, sadness, whatever, all the emotions that are there when this type of loss happens.
Yeah, and it's getting easier said than done, but everything's easier said than done. I think where the non-judgmental factor comes in is within yourself, and there's going to be a lot of noise that come with it. People are going to say things, maybe with mostly with good intention. My opinion is, people get upset when people say certain things, like, "Oh, they're in a better place," or "I'm sorry for whatever those words are." Unless your friend that's saying that is a complete asshole, and you know that, then okay, you could be like pissed off on them. But at the same time, it's just sometimes you don't know what to say, and to give those people grace as well if you think they're doing it with the right intention, and most importantly, give yourself grace with how you're feeling, because all sorts of shit's gonna come up, and you might not even know why. You might be pissed off at the little things, and that's all right. I think as long as you're not avoiding it, like you said, and if you got to avoid it for a little bit because it's too hard, all right. But in my opinion, the more we avoid it, it's going to show up later down the road. It's like a beach ball trying to hold that thing underwater. It's impossible to hold down. The further and harder you push down, the more it's going to pop up down the road. And from some of the discussions I had, I am again not a scientific, I'm not a doctor, but some of the things we hold on to forever show up later physically. They'll manifest physically, whether it's disease, whether it's ailments, this or that. They're going to show up if you don't handle our shit. If you don't handle our shit, and I just hope that you people have the strength, which I know you can, to face it. And I truly feel like that is one of the first steps into that grief journey, if you will.
And meanwhile, your podcast is there for people to listen to. I'm sure they can go through the archives and listen to lots of past episodes that talk about all aspects of this kind of loss and how other people have navigated it and journeyed through it. So I want to direct people there again. It's Dead Talks Podcast. Is that right?
Yeah, that's it. That's it. And I promise I'm usually the host of the podcast. So I am the host, but I mean, usually. So I don't talk as much as I did on this one, but I appreciate the opportunity. And yeah, if anyone's interested, if you have, I'm pushing 200 episodes. It goes from a lot of grief stories across the board. I've had war veterans, scientists, a lot of comedians, near death experiences, religious conversations. It's an eclectic conversation around death, to facing death, mixed in with grief, mixed in with spirituality, mixed in with sometimes having just some fun, as much fun as you can have with these conversations. But it's just something that I think we should talk about. And not every episode may be for you, but if you are into it and anyone wants to give it a listen, I'm grateful for literally every single person that listens. And I want to thank you, Karen, for the opportunity to talk with you, first of all, and also, maybe introduce myself to some people that may not know who I am.
Well, you're a great conversationalist. I've really enjoyed talking with you. I feel like we could go on for hours talking
Yeah, I
about
would love to meet you. And
all
I know we're
these
both in
subjects.
California, so whether this is on record in here or not, if when I get back, and whether we let everything chill out for a little bit, I would love to be in touch, and maybe figure something else out in regards to my podcast with you. And I don't know, I would love to stay connected. You're really good at what you do. I commend you for the work you're doing. I always love seeing more people, and other people that are doing work in this space. You seem like, I know we just met. You seem like a very lovely woman with a lot of depth to you, and you're very good at what you're doing. So I want to thank you for the opportunity.
Well, thank you for that. And we'll definitely stay in touch because a little birdie told me there could be a book somewhere in the future that I'm definitely going to want to read. So
Oh, I appreciate
I want
that.
to
Yeah,
hear
it's
about that.
I haven't even said it publicly because there's something in the works with a book that's going to be written, and it's not even going to be for sale for another to like 2026. So we're way ahead of the game. But the book essentially is going to encompass the podcast, which is, it's not going to be all about my story. I'm going to share my story, but I don't want that to be the vocal point. I want it to be all that I've kind of gathered. I've learned a lot and I've taken in a lot. So it's going to be an eclectic book about death, facing death, stories from the podcast, my perspectives through my own experiences, getting more detail about my story, of course, and essentially just share raw perspectives, raw stories, and just emphasize that it's a conversation about life, not just death.
I'm really looking forward to it. So thanks again, David, for joining me here, and I look forward to talking to you again sometime in the future.
Yeah, we absolutely will, and I appreciate your time. And sorry I talk so much.
Oh, no, no worries.